Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Something rare happened with tonight's first two stories. They were sent to me years apart by two people who have never met, and they both describe encountering what seems to be the same thing in the same stretch of Appalachian West Virginia. When I say the same thing, I mean the descriptions match well enough to give me chills. So we're gonna open with both of these accounts back to back. And after that, we've got more tales from the working world featuring some very unwelcome visitors of the non-human variety, and more. These are tales from the break room. It walked wrong. From Danny94. I need to get a few things straight before I tell this, because people always ask the same questions about it. Yes, I'm a woman who works in utility line inspection, and yes, I work alone a lot of the time. I carry a sidearm when I'm in the field, because my work often takes me to remote areas which have bears and the occasional angry landowner. I don't carry it because I'm paranoid. I carry it because my company requires it for field technicians working solo in bear country. And I've had exactly one encounter with a copperhead that made me glad I had something louder than my voice on me. I've been doing this for about 8 years, and I've seen plenty of weird stuff in the woods, like dead animals arranged in strange ways, almost intentionally, or old structures that aren't on any map. Imagine chimneys standing alone where a cabin used to be, and root cellars with the doors still intact that you'd swear someone was using recently, even though the nearest occupied property was 5 miles away. I even found a school bus once, just sitting in the middle of nowhere about a mile from the nearest road, completely gutted, with small trees growing up through the floor. You could see where the seats had been. The windshield was gone, but the rearview mirror was still attached, and when I walked past it, I caught my own reflection and nearly screamed. The Appalachian backcountry is full of things that don't make sense, and you learn just to note them down, report what's relevant, and keep moving. I thought I'd seen the weirdest things those mountains have to offer, but I was wrong. In the fall of 2021, I was inspecting a stretch of transmission line that runs through a pretty remote area of Pocahontas County. This is a deep mountain country, rugged, elevations over 4,000 feet in places, covered in dense hardwood forest that goes red and gold in October, and looks beautiful from a distance. But up close it's just a wall of trees in every direction. A lot of national forest land, not a lot of people. I can go whole days without seeing another person. Sometimes that's nice, right? But other times not so much. My job that day was to walk a section of the right-of-way, which is the cleared corridor under the power lines, and check for vegetation encroachment, damaged poles, anything that needed to be flagged for a crew. It's about as boring as it sounds most of the time. You walk and you look up, you take photos, and you write notes on a tablet. The right-of-way is usually about 100 feet wide, so you've got the open strip under the lines, and then dense forest on both sides. It feels like walking down a hallway with living walls. I'd been out since about 7 a.m. It was probably close to 2 in the afternoon when I noticed something was off. I was in a section where the terrain dropped away to the east into a hollow, and the tree line on that side was thick second-growth hardwood, mostly beech and maple with a lot of undergrowth. I'd stopped to photograph a leaning pole when I caught movement in my peripheral vision, somewhere down the slope in the trees. I looked, expecting a deer, but what I saw was not a deer at all. There was a figure standing about 60 yards away, just inside the tree line where the shadows were heaviest. It was upright, on 2 legs, and very tall. Taller than any person I've ever seen. And I don't mean like a tall basketball player. I mean proportionally wrong tall, with long, long limbs, arms hanging down past where the knees would have been. And it was so thin, extremely thin, with a grayish color that was close enough to the bark of the beech trees that I almost didn't register it. It was just standing there, slightly angled, like it was leaning to look around a tree without stepping out from behind it. I froze, My first thought, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous, was that someone had placed a mannequin in the woods as a joke, because the proportions were so wrong that my brain was trying to categorize it as something artificial, something man-made. The arms were just too long and the head was just too small. Or maybe it was the right size, but looked small, because the body was so stretched out. I couldn't make out a face. The whole thing was just this pale gray shape standing in the shadows. And then it moved. It shifted its weight from one leg to the other, and the way it moved was the part that really got to me. You know how when a person shifts their weight, their whole body adjusts. Hips and shoulders, head, everything sort of flows together, because that's how your skeleton works. Well, this thing didn't do that. Parts of it moved independently. The legs shifted, but the upper body stayed rigid, and then the upper body sort of caught up in a jerky, delayed way. Like a robot or a marionette. I put my hand on my holster. Honestly, I don't know why, because I don't think a 9mm would have been my first choice if that thing had come at me. But it was a reflex. I kept watching. It shifted again. And then it turned. And when I say turned, I mean the whole body rotated to face me. But the head stayed fixed on me the entire time. The body turned underneath the head that was already looking at me. I don't know how else to describe it. The head simply didn't move. The body swiveled to match it. That stare down between us lasted about 15 seconds. I could hear my own breathing and the hum of the power lines above me. But there was nothing else. No wind or birds. The woods had gone completely quiet. That's when I saw the thing take a step backward, deeper into the trees. And I lost sight of it. It didn't walk away. It sort of just receded into the shadows, like that Homer Simpson meme, like the forest swallowed it. I left. I walked back to my truck at a pace that I will generously call brisk, and I did not look back. I wanted to run very badly, but the rational side of my brain told me that running through uneven terrain with equipment on my back was a good way to trip and break an ankle, and breaking an ankle out here alone with that thing in the woods was not an option I was willing to consider. It took me about 20 minutes to get back to my truck, the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every noise in the woods, every squirrel in the leaves, every branch that popped under my boots made my heart rate spike. When I got to the truck, I locked the doors before I even started the engine, which is something I've never done before or since. I drove to the district office and told my supervisor I'd completed the section, which was a lie because I had another half-mile to go. I went back 2 days later to finish in broad daylight, and I brought a coworker with me. I didn't tell him why I brought him along. He thought I just wanted company, and that was fine by me. I've never seen it again. I've been back through that area multiple times since, but every time I'm in that section, the hair on my arms stands up, and I move faster than I usually would. I scan the trees constantly, instead of just checking the poles and the lines. My body remembers what my brain tries to forget. Something lives in those woods. It's tall, gray, and wrong, and it watches. The Tall Gray, from GMC Farland, 22. So I don't usually submit these kinds of things to the podcasts I listen to. I listen to this show, but I'm a pretty skeptical guy in general. I grew up hunting and fishing and camping, and I've spent a lot of time in the woods, so I don't spook easy. But something happened to me about 4 years back that I've never been able to explain, and it's honestly messed with my head. In 2022, I was working on a survey crew for a natural gas pipeline company. We were doing preliminary route surveys in Randolph County, West Virginia. Lots of mountains, hollows, heavy forest, and not many people around. Our job was to walk potential pipeline routes, taking GPS readings and marking features, assessing the terrain for the engineers. We worked in 2 teams of 2 or 3 and spent most of our time bushwhacking through stuff that hadn't seen a human footprint in years. My partner was a guy named Cal, late 20s, quiet, but good at his job. The kind of guy you want with you in rough country because he doesn't complain and he pays attention. We were working a route along a ridgeline that dropped off steeply to the north into a drainage that was all old growth, big old hemlocks and poplars. It was October, late in the afternoon, and the light was getting that golden sideways quality it gets in the mountains when the sun drops behind the next ridge over. We'd been working for about 6 hours and were getting ready to call it, when Cal stopped ahead of me and held up his fist. That was our signal to freeze in place. I thought he had spotted a bear. We'd seen bear sign all day, scat and claw marks on trees. He pointed downhill into the drainage without saying a word. Quietly, I went up next to him and I looked. About 70 or 80 yards below us, standing in a gap between two big hemlocks, there was something. My first impression was that this was some person, maybe a man wearing gray, like a gray bodysuit. It was tall, well over 6 feet, thin and standing upright. But even as I thought person in my head, the instinctual parts of my brain told me that wasn't right. That was the wrong answer. The arms were extraordinarily long. They hung at its sides. I swear they almost reached the ground. The head was pretty small relative to the body, or maybe the body was just too big for the head. I wasn't sure how to frame it. But it was standing perfectly still, facing our direction. Its posture looked very stiff. Cal whispered, "What do you think that is?" I shook my head. I didn't have an answer to that. We watched it. I'd estimated we watched it for 2 solid minutes, without either of us moving or saying a word. It stood there with a kind of eerie patience, vaguely humanoid, but we could tell it shouldn't be here. Suddenly it moved. This part made my mouth fall open, because I'd never seen anything move that way. It made this disjointed motion to the left, a step. The leg went first and the body followed, but not fluid in the slightest. It was broken up, like watching a video with dropped frames. Cal grabbed my arm and I could feel his hand shaking through my jacket sleeve. This man was not a man who shook. It took another step, same direction. Then it stopped, and its head rotated towards us like a tank turret. Just the head. It rotated about 45 degrees in our direction. It was looking at us. And still I could not see any features. The whole area where a face should have been was just smooth grayish surface, blank and featureless, pointing right at us from 70 yards away. Cal said to me in a whisper, "We need to go." I agreed. We backed up along the ridge, keeping our eyes on it for as long as we could see it. After about 30 seconds of backing up, it was out of our line of sight behind the terrain. So we turned then and walked fast toward the truck. We didn't speak until we were back in the truck with the doors locked and the engine running. About a mile down the gravel road, Cal asked me what I thought it was. I told him I had no idea. He asked if I thought it was a person, like someone in a costume or a suit. That was something I was sure of. I told him no. I didn't think it was human at all. He agreed. He said the thing that bothered him the most was that face, the lack of a face. He said that when it turned its head towards us, he'd been looking right at it through his scope, and there wasn't anything on that face, just total smoothness like old concrete that had been worn flat. Then he said, "I don't ever want to come back to this section." I told our project manager that we needed to reroute the survey because of terrain issues. Terrain problems are common enough in that area that it wasn't a suspicious excuse. So yeah, I don't know what we saw. I've turned it over in my head 100 times. I've looked it up endlessly over the years too, but the closest things I could find to it might have been the pale crawler or a forest giant, but they don't fit perfectly. This thing was much more rigid, more like something imitating a living creature than something that actually was one. I will say one more thing. About a month after our sighting, I was at a gas station in Elkins, which is the closest real town to where we'd been working, and I overheard two guys in hunting camo talking at the next pump. One of them was saying he'd been scouting for deer up in the Cheat Mountain area and had seen something gray standing in the trees that he thought was a dead tree until it moved. The other guy laughed and said he was seeing things, but the first guy wasn't laughing. His voice was shaky. I almost said something, but I stayed quiet. I got in my truck and I left. The Woman on the Fourth Floor, from Crispy 2001. I worked as a janitor at a hospital in Macon, Georgia, for 3 years from 2018 to 2021. It was a mid-sized regional hospital, 4 floors built in the 1970s and renovated a couple of times since. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I was responsible for the common areas, hallways, lobbies, cafeteria, and the administrative wing. I didn't clean patient rooms. That was a different crew entirely, a contracted outfit that came in during day shift. So I wasn't in areas where sick or dying people were being cared for. The 4th floor was a mix of admin offices and storage. Half of it was active during the day, people doing billing and records, and whatever else hospitals need office workers for. There were printers running, phones ringing, people complaining about the coffee machine, and things like that. Your normal office stuff. The other half was storage rooms full of old equipment, like filing cabinets and beds that weren't in use, decommissioned monitors, and boxes of paper records from before the hospital went digital. At night, the whole floor was empty. The offices were locked, the lights were off, except for the exit signs and a few security lights in the hallway that gave everything a green-white glow. It was the quietest part of the building, and I usually cleaned it first, just to get it out of the way, so I could spend the rest of my shift on the lower floors, where other people were around. About 6 months into the job, I was mopping the 4th floor hallway around 11:30 at night, when I heard a door close somewhere ahead of me. A soft click, like someone pulled a door shut gently. I looked up and every door in the hallway was closed, which was how they always were at night. I assumed it was the building settling or a draft pulling a door that wasn't latched properly, so I kept on mopping. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. They were coming from the far end of the hallway, past the bend where the corridor turns toward the storage wing. Soft footsteps on tile. It sounded like someone in regular shoes walking at a normal pace. I stopped and listened for a moment. They continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. I called out. Maybe a nurse or a security guard had come up for something, but no one replied. I went around the bend and checked the storage wing. The hallway was empty and lit only by that green glow of the exit signs. Every door was closed. I tried a few handles and they were all locked. I went back to mopping again. This happened again the following week. Same thing about the door closing and footsteps, but no one being there. Then it happened again a 3rd time and a 4th time. I mentioned it to the other night staff casually, like, "Does anybody ever go up to the 4th floor at night?" The nurses said no. Security said they did rounds up there once a shift, but not at the times I was hearing things. One of the older security guards gave me a look when I brought it up, and he said, "You hearing her?" I said, "Hearing who?" He told me that people had been hearing a woman on the 4th floor for years. Footsteps, doors, and sometimes a voice. He said a couple of the night nurses had even seen her, too, in the hallway near the storage wing. He described her as middle-aged, wearing a white blouse and a dark skirt, like office clothes, but from a different decade. She would be walking down the hallway, then she'd turn a corner and be gone. One nurse told him she'd followed the woman around the bend and found the hallway empty, every door locked. The security guard said nobody knew who she was for certain. There had been talk over the years about looking into whether someone had died in the building, beyond patients, that is. Perhaps an employee who had a heart attack or a stroke at her desk. An older nurse, a woman who had been at the hospital since the 80s, told that security guard she thought the ghost might be a billing clerk named Ruth Ann or Ruth Ann, something like that. She worked on the 4th floor in the late 1980s and died suddenly. She wasn't sure if the woman died at the hospital or at home, and she couldn't remember her last name, so there was no way to confirm this. But she said that the description fit. Dark hair, white blouse, office clothes. She remembered because the woman always dressed nice, nicer than most of the admin staff, as if she was going to church every day instead of sitting in front of a computer. That security guard said he'd thought about digging into it himself, but ultimately decided against it. "Some things you just let 'em be," he said. "She's been here longer than I have. If she wants to walk the hallway, that's her business." I respected that. He'd been at the hospital for 12 years at that point. He was one of those guys who had seen enough of life that very little bothered him. And she didn't bother me, really. Once I knew what it was, or at least what other people said it was, the footsteps stopped scaring me and just became part of the job. I'd hear them, even call out an "evening, ma'am" under my breath, and I'd keep mopping. I figured if she'd been walking that hallway for 30-something years without hurting anybody, she wasn't about to start with me. But I did see her once, and that one time is the reason I'm even writing this. It was my last month at the hospital, February 2021. I was on the 4th floor later than usual, about 1 a.m. I had to deal with a spill in the cafeteria that ate up my first hour. So I was behind schedule and annoyed about it, which is maybe why I wasn't paying attention to the usual sounds. I was mopping near the bend in the hallway, working fast, earbuds in but no music playing, because I'd learned a long time ago that you don't block your hearing in empty hospital corridors at night. I looked up at some point, and there she was, about 30 feet away, standing in the corridor near one of the storage room doors. She was exactly what that security guard had described. Middle-aged, about late 40s or early 50s, dark hair pinned up in a style that looked like it was from the 80s, maybe early 90s. A white blouse, dark skirt, sensible shoes. She was standing with her hand on the door handle, as if she had just come out of the room, or was about to go back in. She was looking at me, and she was solid. Really think about that. She looked completely real, completely three-dimensional, like another living person standing in a hallway. If I didn't know the floor was empty, if I didn't already know every door was locked, if I didn't know what I knew from 2 years of hearing footsteps and doors and stories, I would have walked up to her and asked if she needed help finding something. That's how real she looked. We looked at each other for maybe 5 seconds. Her expression wasn't scary. She didn't look angry or sad or threatening. She just looked like someone who had noticed me and was mildly surprised I was there, like I'd walked into her office without knocking. Then she turned away from me, opened the door, and walked into the storage room. The door closed behind her with that same soft click I'd been hearing for 2 years. I walked over and tried the handle then. It was locked. I knocked and said, "Hello?" Nothing. I finished my shift, and I never saw her again. I left that hospital for a different job. Same profession, though, and I still wonder who she was and why she's still there. Needless to say, I believe in ghosts very much now. The Trucker, from Beck's 1987. This isn't a ghost story. I wish it was, because ghosts don't actually do anything. This was a person, a real live human being, and that's what made it so much worse. I was 24 years old, working as a night clerk at a truck stop off I-40 in eastern Oklahoma. I won't name the exact place, but it had big diesel pumps out front, a little convenience store with 4 aisles of snacks and motor oil and air freshener shaped like pine trees, with showers for the truckers in the back, and a diner attached to the side that closed at 10. After 10, it was just me and whoever was buying cigarettes and energy drinks at 2 in the morning. The truck lot out back could hold maybe 40 rigs, and on a busy night, it'd be 3/4 full of guys sleeping in their cabs. Weeknights were slower, maybe 10, 15 trucks. I could see the lot from the counter if I craned my neck. The job was okay. I am a night person by nature, and most of the truckers were decent. Tired and quiet usually. They'd come in, buy their stuff, maybe use the shower, and go back to their truck. Some of them were regulars, and I knew them by name. There was a guy named Ray who drove for Werner and always bought 2 banana moon pies. There was Carla, who hauled refrigerated loads and would talk your ear off about her grandkids if you let her. Mostly good people. Occasionally, you would get a drunk or a tweaker, but that was rare for our stop, because we were in the middle of nowhere, and the tweakers tended to cluster near the bigger towns where they could get supply. There was one trucker, though, who came through every few weeks, and he made my skin crawl. I never even got his name. He drove a white Peterbilt with no company markings on it, which isn't super unusual for an owner-operator, but his truck was always immaculate, like weirdly clean. Truckers live in their rigs, and the cabs usually looked like it. This guy's truck looked like it had just rolled off the lot every single time. He was tall, about 6'2" if I had to guess. Lean, too, always wearing the same tan Carhartt jacket and a ball cap pulled low. He had these pale blue eyes, and he didn't blink nearly enough. I know that's a weird detail to focus on, but it's one of those things that stuck with me. Most people blink every few seconds. This guy would go 20 or 30 seconds at a time without blinking, I swear to God. It made talking to him feel like being studied through some window. He never bought much. A coffee and sometimes a water. He'd pay in cash, exact change too. He never used a card, and he'd leave just like that. He didn't make small talk. He never asked about the weather or road conditions or anything that truckers normally talk about. He would look at me with those pale, steady eyes and say, "Thanks," and walk out. Every single time the same routine and the same word. I started dreading seeing that white Peterbilt pulling into the lot because I knew exactly how the interaction would go, and something about the precision of it unsettled me. The thing that started bothering me beyond the staring was that he'd come inside at odd hours. Most truckers who stop at 2 or 3 a.m. are on a schedule. They've been driving. They need to fuel up and use the bathroom and maybe grab food. Then they're back on the road. This guy would pull in at like 3 a.m., park, then not come inside for almost 2 hours. I'd see his truck in the lot from the window, and the cab light would be on, and he'd be sitting in there. Then at 4 or 5 in the morning, he would finally come in, buy his coffee and sometimes water, and leave. But sometimes he wouldn't leave. He'd go back to his truck, turn the cab light off, and sit there in the dark. I'd seen the faint glow of what I assumed was a phone screen, and that was it. I mentioned this guy to my manager at some point. She said some truckers are just strange, and to let it go, unless he caused trouble, of course. Fair enough. But he never caused trouble. He never raised his voice or made a mess. He never said anything threatening. But one night I was stocking shelves near the front window, and I looked out at the lot. His truck was parked facing the store, cab light off, and he was standing outside his truck, leaning against the driver's side door, looking directly at the store. At me, arms folded, just standing there in the cold at 3 a.m., watching the building. I stepped back from the window and out of the aisle so he couldn't see me. I waited about 5 minutes, and then I looked again. He was gone, but his truck was still there. He simply was no longer next to it. That's when the door chime rang, and he walked in. "Evening," he said. With exact change, he bought a coffee, then walked out and got in his truck. He drove away, and I watched his taillights until they disappeared on the interstate. I started locking the front door after midnight. Company policy said we were supposed to stay open 24 hours, but I told my manager I'd been getting nervous about a specific individual, and she let me start locking up at 1 a.m. and only buzzing people in. She didn't push for details, and I was thankful for that. He came through one more time after that. It was about 3 weeks later, a Wednesday night, dead quiet, maybe 2 trucks in the lot at most. He pulled in and parked in the back of the lot in his usual spot, facing the store. He sat in the cab for about an hour and a half. I knew it was him before I even saw the truck because of where he parked. Nobody else even used that spot. It was the farthest corner of the lot, away from the lights, where you'd park if you wanted to watch the building without being easily seen from inside. I sat behind the counter, and I kept glancing at the security monitor, watching his cab light come on and go off again. Then he got out, and he walked up to the front door and tried the handle. It was locked. He stood there and looked through the glass at me. I was behind the counter about 20 feet away, and we made eye contact through the door. The fluorescent light from inside hit his face, and I could see him clearly. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle again either. He didn't mouth words or gesture for me to let him in. He stood there looking at me through the door with an unblinking stare, breath fogging up the glass slightly, one hand still on the door handle. Then he smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile, and I wish I never saw it. It didn't look like a friendly expression. It looked performative, like he was showing me his teeth because he wanted me to see them. Like letting me know that a locked door was a minor inconvenience, and he found it amusing that I thought it would help. He turned around, walked back to his truck, and left. He pulled onto the interstate heading west, and his taillights got smaller and smaller until they were gone. He never came back. I'm not sure why. Maybe he moved on to a different route. Maybe he found a different truck stop with a clerk who didn't lock the door. One way or another, he lost interest. Good, because I never wanted to see him again. The Voice in the Stairwell, from M. Delgado 97. I used to work the front desk at a Marriott in El Paso, Texas, 3 to 11 shift, which meant I'd spend the last few hours of my shift mostly alone in the lobby, since the overnight guy, Tomas, would sometimes be late. He was a good dude, but punctuality was not his strong suit. So from about 10:30 to whenever he rolled in, it was me and the lobby and the security cameras, and whatever guests happened to walk through, which at that hour was usually no one. The hotel was 12 stories, and the stairwells were the concrete echo chamber type with the metal railings, the kind where if you drop your keys on the 5th floor, you can hear them hit from the lobby. Sound carried in those stairwells like you wouldn't believe. A door closing on the 8th floor sounded like it was 2 flights away. There was a night when I was alone at the desk around 10:45. The lobby was empty. The elevator was parked on the ground floor with its doors closed. The TV in the lounge area was off. It was that specific kind of hotel quiet where you can hear the ice machine humming through the wall. I was doing some end-of-shift paperwork when I heard what sounded like a man talking in the east stairwell. The door to that stairwell was about 15 feet from the front desk, a heavy fire door with a push bar. Guests would sometimes use the stairs if the elevator was slow. But at that hour, it was unusual. I assumed someone was on a phone call and didn't think much of it. But the voice kept going, and it wasn't a conversation. It was one voice, steady and uninterrupted, like someone reading aloud or reciting something. But I couldn't make out the words through that heavy fire door. But I could hear the cadence, rhythmic even, almost monotone. It went on for probably 3 minutes straight without any pause, which is a long time for someone to talk without stopping. Try sometime to talk for 3 uninterrupted minutes and you'll see what I mean. You need to breathe, you gotta swallow, you lose your train of thought. But this voice didn't stop. I walked over to the stairwell door and listened. The voice was coming from above, maybe a couple floors up, and it echoed down the shaft in a way that made it sound hollow and flat. I opened the door and called up, "Hello? Everything okay?" The voice stopped immediately. Dead silence. I stood there listening for about 30 seconds, but there was nothing else. I let the door close and I went back to the desk. 5 minutes later, it started again. Same voice, same cadence, and same stairwell. This time I didn't investigate. I just ignored it. When Tomas, the overnight guy, showed up around 11:15, I mentioned what happened. He listened for a second, said he didn't hear anything, and shrugged. But by then, it had stopped. I forgot about this event until it happened again about a week later. Same time roughly, and same stairwell, and it sounded like the same voice. I mentioned it to the daytime manager, and she said the stairwell was sometimes used by homeless people trying to find a warm place to sleep, and that I should call security if I suspected someone was in there. I called security that night. They walked the entire stairwell, all 12 floors, and found nobody up there. The doors on every floor were closed and locked from the stairwell side, which meant someone would have needed a room key to exit onto any floor. The only unlocked exit was the lobby door, right next to me, and no one had come through it. This went on for about 2 months. Every week or so, the voice, always around 10:30 to 11 at night, and it was always in the east stairwell, never the west. And it would be a single male voice speaking in an even rhythm that I could hear but couldn't understand. I swear the words were right at the edge of my comprehension, where you kept thinking you were about to catch a phrase and then it would slip away. I got used to it. It became background noise like the ice machine or the elevator motor. A few times I opened the door and called up and the voice would stop. One time it didn't stop. I stood there with the door open and listened, and the voice just kept going, floor after floor above me, filling the stairwell with this steady, low murmur. It was the strangest thing, because the stairwell was clearly empty. I could see up the first 3 flights from where I stood, and there was nobody on any of the landings. The voice sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the concrete, impossible to pinpoint which floor it originated from. I closed the door and went back to work. I asked around with the other desk staff during shift change. 2 of them had heard it before. A woman named Diana, who'd worked at the hotel for years, said she'd heard the voice at least a dozen times and had stopped caring about it. She said the east stairwell had something going on, and that she'd mentioned it to the GM once, and he'd told her it was probably sound carrying from the HVAC system through the walls. Diana did not buy that explanation and told me so, but she also said that whatever it was had not caused any real problems, so she wasn't going to lose sleep over it. The other front desk person who'd heard it was a guy named Mark, who'd only been there for a few months. He said hearing it once was enough for him, and he would no longer go near the east stairwell after 10 p.m. The last time it happened was in December. I opened the stairwell door because I'd gotten bold about it by that point, and I called up to it like I always did. The voice stopped. Then, after about 5 seconds of silence, it said something that I could actually understand. Clear as day, like the speaker was standing on the landing right above me. It said, "Come up." I closed the door. I went back to my desk. I did not go up. I don't care what was saying it or why. Nothing good has ever come from a disembodied voice in an empty stairwell asking you to come closer. I've seen enough scary movies to know that. And more importantly, I've got enough common sense. Tomas showed up about 10 minutes later, and I told him what happened. He went pale and said he'd heard the voice before too, but it had never said anything he could make out. I asked if he'd ever gone up to look for it, and he laughed, saying, "Man, I don't even like taking those stairs in the daytime." I've since moved on to different employment, but I never found out who or what was talking in that stairwell. To this day, I still hope it's some sort of acoustic trick, the way the building channeled sound from outside or from the HVAC system. But even then, acoustic tricks don't say the words perfectly, "Come up." The Follower, from Amanda Jean X. I'm a real estate photographer. I work independently, mostly taking listing photos for agents in the greater Nashville area. It's a good job if you're organized, and you don't mind being in and out of empty houses all day. For me, it's enjoyable. You get to see the inside of hundreds of homes and you start to get a real feel for the stories behind them. Every house has a vibe. Most of the time, the homeowners are out when I shoot, which is standard. You don't want people's stuff and clutter in listing photos after all, so the house is staged and empty, and I've got an hour or so to move through the rooms and get my shots done. Also, I'm almost always alone. I have a system. I arrive, let myself in with the lockbox code, walk through once to get a feel for the light, then start shooting. I've done this hundreds of times by now without incident. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I realize that going into empty houses alone for a living sounds risky, and you'd be right, but before what I'm about to describe, nothing had ever happened that made me feel unsafe. In the spring of 2023, I had a showing scheduled for a house in a rural area, about 40 minutes from Nashville, down past Franklin toward the Williamson County line. It was a farmhouse on about 8 acres, recently renovated, listed at $1.2 million, which in that area is a nice property, but nothing unusual. Big porch, white siding, red barn in the back, picture-perfect stuff. The listing agent was someone I'd worked with a few times, a woman named Kelly, and she gave me the lockbox code, telling me the homeowners would be away for the weekend. I drove out on a Saturday morning to shoot it. The house was gorgeous. Open floor plan, new kitchen, original hardwood floors that renovation had kept. I parked in the gravel drive, letting myself in through the lockbox, and I started working. I always begin on the ground floor and work my way up, starting with the wide shots of the main living spaces, then doing the detail shots of fixtures, countertops, and stuff like that. I'd been there about 20 minutes when I heard a car pull into the gravel drive. I looked out the front window to see this dark sedan, a Nissan Altima, I think, parked behind my car. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. I figured it might be a neighbor, maybe the homeowner coming back for something. I waited for him to get out, but he didn't. Instead, he just sat in the car. After a few minutes, I went back to shooting. Eventually, I checked the window again, maybe 10 minutes later, I think, and the car was still there. The man was still in the driver's seat. I was starting to feel weird about it, so I texted the listing agent, asking if anyone else was supposed to be at the property right now. She said no, then asked me why. I told her there was someone parked in the driveway. She said it might be a curious neighbor and to just keep working. I did, but when I went upstairs to shoot the bedrooms, I could see from the second-floor window that the man had finally gotten out of his car. Now he was standing in the front yard, maybe 20 feet from the porch, facing the house, his hands in his jacket pockets. He was standing there on the lawn, looking up at the house, at the windows. He was of average height, average build, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I couldn't make out his face in detail from the second floor, but I could see that he was looking directly at the house and he wasn't moving. He stood there like a guy admiring some painting in a museum, still and attentive, except he was a stranger on someone's lawn, staring at someone else's house, with a woman alone inside that house. I stepped back from the window. My heart was going fast, that adrenaline feeling where your hands get tingly and your hearing sharpens. I stood in the upstairs hallway for a minute, trying to think clearly. Maybe he was a contractor working on renovations. Maybe he was the appraiser. He could be just a weird neighbor. I kept making excuses because the alternative was something I didn't want to think about, which was that a strange man had followed my car to a remote property and was now standing outside, waiting for something. I called the listing agent this time instead of texting. I told her a man was standing in the yard, staring at the house, and it was making me uncomfortable. She said that was definitely strange, so she would call the homeowner. I could hear in her voice that she was taking it seriously, which made me feel both better and worse at the same time. She told me to lock the doors then, and to sit tight. I went downstairs, checking the front door, locked, the back door, also locked, and I felt a tad better. That's when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Slow and heavy footsteps on the wooden boards. They went from one end of the porch to the other and stopped. I was standing in the kitchen, which didn't have a view of the porch, and I stayed there. Then the footsteps came back, slower now, stopping at the front door. The door handle turned. He tried it gently, like he was testing it. The lock held. The handle went back to its resting position. I called 911. I told them someone was trying to enter a property I was working in, and that I was alone. They said they'd send someone. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line, so I did. The footsteps left the porch. I heard them on the gravel, going back toward the driveway. I went to a side window, watching the man walk to his car, get in, then pull out of the driveway. He drove down the road and was gone by the time the sheriff's deputy arrived about 12 minutes later. The deputy took my statement and my description of the car, a dark Nissan sedan, maybe an Altima or Sentra. Oklahoma plates, but I only caught the first 2 digits. The man was black, medium build, dark jacket, baseball cap. I couldn't give a better description than that, and the deputy said that was fine. He said it could have been someone casing the property for a burglary since the listing was public online, with the address and photos showing the house was clearly empty and recently staged. He said it could have been a lot of things. Then he told me to stop working alone in vacant houses in rural areas. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's my entire job. That's literally what I do every day. But he had a point. The listing agent called me back later that afternoon and said the homeowner didn't recognize the description of the man or the car. Nobody in the neighborhood did either, and the nearest neighbor was about a quarter mile down the road. So it wasn't like there were a lot of people to ask. Hesitantly, I finished the shoot that following Monday, but only with my boyfriend sitting in the living room the entire time, reading a book. He thought I was being dramatic until I showed him the texts between me and Kelly. Then he didn't think I was being so dramatic anymore. Kelly called me a few weeks later. I assumed it was about a new listing, but her voice was different. She said the sheriff's deputy who'd responded to my call had contacted her because they'd found a dark Nissan sedan matching the description I gave. It had been abandoned in a ditch off a county road about 12 miles from the farmhouse. She paused for a long time. I could tell there was more info and that she was deciding whether or not I should be told. Ultimately, she did tell me. She said they had found 2 duffel bags in the trunk, one containing a set of knives that appeared to be clean and unused. The other contained knives that were used, and that's all she would say about those knives. She said the deputy wanted to know if I'd be willing to come in and give a more detailed statement. I said yes. I went the next day. They didn't tell me much else. I don't know if they ever identified the owner of the car. I'm not sure if they matched anything to an open case. But I know that what was in that trunk, and the fact the man had been there when I was alone, those 2 things can't be a coincidence. I've since started carrying pepper spray on every job I go to, and I tell someone my exact schedule and address before every shoot. I also got a doorbell camera that I stick on with a mount at every property I work. Just a little portable one that connects to my phone and records anyone who approaches the door. My boyfriend says that's smart. I do too. I keep thinking about that door handle turning, and what would have happened if he'd gotten inside. The Scratching in the Walk-In, from Throwaway CBIA. Short and sweet on this one. Well, short-ish. I was a line cook at a steakhouse in Council Bluffs, Iowa, for about 2 years. The restaurant was in a building that used to be a church, then a furniture store, then sat empty for a decade before someone bought it, converting it into a restaurant in 2014. You could still see where the church stuff had been if you knew what to look for. The arch above the main dining room was the old sanctuary arch, and the wine cellar was actually a baptismal room with the pool filled in. The owner thought the history gave it character. I thought it gave it problems. Our walk-in cooler was in the basement, which was the old church basement. Cinder block walls and a concrete floor that was always a little damp no matter what the weather was doing outside. In summer, it sweated. In winter, it just felt wet. The floor drain never quite worked right, and there was always a faint smell of mildew down there that the industrial cleaner couldn't fully cover. The whole basement felt like a place that didn't want people in it, if that even makes sense. Like it was just tolerating you. Nobody liked going down there alone. The ghost thing came later, but even before that, it was just dark and cold, and the stairs were narrow, and the light switch was at the bottom instead of the top, of course. So you had to walk down 12 creepy steps in the dark before you could see anything. Bad design, in my opinion. Whoever built it clearly didn't think about the fact that someone would be going down those stairs at midnight, carrying a bus tub of steaks. I slipped on those stairs at least twice in my first month. The second time, I almost dropped a full cambro of beef tenderloin, and I seriously wondered if this job was worth my kneecaps. Now to the reason I'm writing the story. Around November of my first year, I was closing, alone in the kitchen because the other cook had already clocked out, and I needed to grab a case of burger patties from the walk-in for the next morning's prep. Just routine stuff. I went down the stairs, hit the lights, and opened the walk-in door, and while I was inside loading the case onto a sheet tray, I heard scratching on the outside of the walk-in wall. It was coming from the back wall, the one that backed up against the foundation of the building, against dirt and concrete. There was nothing back there. It was a foundation wall with solid earth on the other side. I knew that because the owner had shown me the building plans once when he was bragging about the renovation. That wall backed up against the original stone and concrete foundation of the church, and beyond that was packed dirt, and eventually the ground under the parking lot next door. The scratching was slow and irritating, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but deeper and heavier, with more weight behind it. It would go for about 5 seconds, stop, then start again in a slightly different spot, as if whatever was making the noise was moving along the wall. I grabbed my patties and got out of there fast. I told myself it was mice, maybe rats, something inside the walls. The building was old. Things like that do happen, old buildings with critters. But it kept happening, 2 or 3 times a week, always when I was the last one in the building, always from the back wall of the walk-in. And over the months, it got louder. The volume stayed below anything you'd call screaming, but the intensity increased, harder and more forceful, like whatever was making the sound was putting more effort into it. I started timing it without really meaning to, and I noticed that it usually started between midnight and 12:30. It would last for anywhere from 5 minutes to about 20. It wasn't constant. There would be bursts of scratching, then silence, then more scratching, like it was testing the wall or feeling for something. I brought it up to the other kitchen staff, getting mixed reactions. One guy said he'd heard it too, and thought it was pipes expanding and contracting. Another guy got quiet when I mentioned it, and his face looked nervous. When it was just the two of us, he told me flat out that the basement was messed up, and that he never went down there alone anymore. He said he'd heard the scratching before, yeah, but he'd also heard what sounded like breathing coming from behind the back wall one night. Heavy and slow, rhythmic breathing, like something big sleeping. He said he'd told the owner about it, and the owner had just blown him off. After that, he just dealt with it by going down there in pairs. He wouldn't say more than that, and I didn't want to press him anymore. He looked like talking about it was physically painful. The last time I heard it was the night I quit. I was in the walk-in alone, late, and that scratching started on the back wall like always. But this time, about 10 seconds in, there was a single hard bang on the wall from the other side. It was not a scratch anymore. It was a hit, a fist or a palm, flat against the concrete, hard enough that I felt the vibration through the wall. Then silence, followed by 3 more bangs, evenly spaced. Bang, bang, bang. Then the scratching started again, faster than before, almost frantic. I walked out of the walk-in, up the stairs, out the back door, and I called the owner from my car to tell him I was done. He asked if something happened, and I told him the basement was his problem. and I would not be going back down there. He wanted to argue, but I hung up. I found another job the next week, at some barbecue place. As for the steakhouse, I requested that they mail me my last check. I wanted nothing further to do with that building. This world is a lot weirder than we give it credit for, and that seems to go double for the places where people work alone, especially regarding what people are apparently seeing in the Appalachian Mountains. That puppet-like thing watching them in the tree line. What could that be? Let me know what you think, if you have any theories, or if you've seen it yourself. Good night. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find my other podcast, Unexplained Encounters, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. You'll love it if you need more scary story narrations from yours truly. The show features stories about the unknown and horrifying, especially in the outdoors. Till next time, everyone, I've got to clock out, but I'll be back again real soon.